This video is sponsored by Surfshark, more on that later. The biggest bits of YouTuber drama are usually sparked by troubling accusations, scamming viewers for a quick buck, or some controversial statements made on camera. Yet one of the largest scandals of 2024 all centered around a bad business decision. You see, the trio behind Watcher Entertainment have maintained a huge presence on YouTube ever since the BuzzFeed video boom of the mid-2010s, where the company was funneling unfathomable amounts of money into creating the next generation of up-and-coming internet stars. Though of course, succeeding in that inevitably led to those stars having more negotiating power than the corporation itself. So when BuzzFeed tried to preemptively address this concern through rather draconian means,
there was a standoff happening because they had done this stupid contract that I was refusing to sign, that they had tricked, I feel like, tricked the entire company into signing.
But the image release waiver was broad reaching. It basically was like, we own your likeness in any way we want to do it.
Specifically said
forever.
we would own your life story.
Practically every one of their recognizable faces departed in order to pursue a career in media on their terms. And while this has sometimes included ventures in an entirely different medium, many of these creatives would instead continue the various series they were hosting for BuzzFeed on their own channels, and ultimately use this publicity to launch various spin-offs with the end goal of creating an original brand. So of course, Ryan Bergara, Shane Madej, and Stephen Lim decided to take that plunge and start their own channel, one where they would continue the various non-fiction series that they had started on BuzzFeed, with these ranging from uncovering the supernatural and mysterious to pulling back the curtain on the lush and luxurious. And they did so under a strict commitment to providing
television caliber quality content.
TV caliber content.
Television caliber content.
Television caliber content.
Television caliber content.
Not quite TV.
It's close enough.
It's close enough.
Put television caliber.
Television caliber perhaps, but TV, not quite yet.
So Watcher was not only born, but skyrocketed to success. On this new channel, it wasn't long before their core series were consistently hitting millions of views. But it also wasn't long before that just wasn't enough for the trio, because they wanted it all. They wanted the prestige of working with a television-sized budget without having to give up the freedom of online distribution. They desired a consistent, reliable output that would require the touch of dozens of hands, but with the kindness of hiring a full-time staff instead of freelancers. They were trying to do something that truly no one had ever done on YouTube before, but as it turned out, that was for a reason. It just wasn't feasible to pursue such conflicting methods of production and distribution. In other words, what they were looking to do, it just wasn't possible, let alone sustainable. And so while you would expect the team to sit down and discuss how they would shift their business strategy to better fit the market, they kinda did the opposite, opting to instead ask the entire market to shift to accommodate them.
As sad as it is to say goodbye to YouTube, I guess we just hope you guys follow us this one last time.
To our very own independent streaming service, Watcher.
Yes, instead of adapting to the demands of YouTube, Watcher decided to abandon the platform in favor of their own paid streaming service. And they aren't the only creators to make this kind of move, as what was once College Humor and the Try Guys have both started similar services. But Watcher easily had the worst reception, with them losing almost 100,000 subscribers and being mercilessly mocked across the internet.
That is extraordinarily out of touch. That face right there says it all.
And while I made a video last year going into what allowed similar moves to succeed with other companies, Watcher's backlash stemmed from a couple of key places. For starters, they presented this decision as being not only necessary, but the only way for their business to survive.
And we didn't want to bring Watcher to a close, which would have happened if we stayed solely on YouTube.
But upon closer inspection, the bigger issue seemed to be that Watcher just wasn't managing their funds well at all. Partially because of their aforementioned staff, which seemed to be really bloated, as videos as simple as Let's Plays or commentary would feature over a dozen credited crew members. Even worse, other creators who were managing similar budgets and brands couldn't fathom how Watcher could be running into the financial wall they were describing, given how lucrative their numbers were.
I have more than 25 employees, and I'm able to finance all of that completely fine through streaming. And my streaming numbers are nowhere near as lucrative as their Patreon numbers. It's not even close. Theirs blows me out of the water.
There was also the messaging, which you can argue came off as kind of elitist. Like, there was almost this attitude that they were doing the viewers a favor by paywalling their content.
As sad as it is to say goodbye to YouTube, it's the right thing to do.
But you know, all this to say, you'll still occasionally see us on YouTube. We're gonna post trailers for our shows there. We're gonna have the season premieres of all of our series on there. But if you wanna watch the full seasons of all of our content, the streamer will be the exclusive home for all of that starting May 31st.
Steven, talk about money.
What a weird, wonderful idea.
What a weird, wonderful idea that would be. Which is why I think our content doesn't necessarily always like trend. Hey, we've trended quite a few times, okay? But that's never, that's never our goal. And I think by that token, YouTube has never been like the perfect fit for us.
First of all, bigger and better content.
And the fact that they were using their television caliber mission as one of the main justifications for this move only magnified that.
Everyone has different missions they're marching towards on YouTube. Ours was to make a television show.
As many of their viewers made it clear, they'd rather see the production value take a hit than lose access to the content entirely. And hell, some people actively disliked their increased production value as it made them feel less real. Also amidst this announcement was the reveal that they would be relaunching the spiritual successor to Worth It, which would basically feature them enjoying bougie living since the rest of us can't afford to.
That's true.
Adam,
your pals.
Andrew, the old friends from Worth It, and we're going to be launching the spiritual successor, which is going to be called Travel Season.
And yeah, it's a great series. It's their only one that I've personally watched, but that's not the best timing, right? We're not letting you watch our content anymore because we need money. Anyway, Watch Us Fly First Class is not the best marketing push.
Welcome to Travel Season,
the show where every season we travel somewhere new.
This time, we're going all the way to Seoul, South Korea.
To eat and experience as much as we can.
But most of all, do what we want to do.
But okay, plenty has been said about why this announcement turned into such a disaster, but what was the effect? 1 year later, are they still hurting from this misstep, or have they already recovered? Spoilers, the answer sounds a lot like an uncomfortable grimace because...
Not gonna lie, it's a lot to start unpacking, so may as well start with the basics. But first, I want to thank today's sponsor, Surfshark. Look, when you're online, especially on public Wi-Fi, you should really consider using a VPN like Surfshark. It encrypts your connection and protects your data from bad actors, trackers, and anyone trying to snoop on what you're doing. It also grants you access to streaming content that's otherwise locked in your region. Say there's a show that's only available on Netflix in the UK or Canada. You can use your VPN to make Netflix think that you're there, thus unlocking this content. It's a simple way to get more out of the subscriptions you already pay for. And it's not just the VPN. Surfshark also offers tools like their antivirus and identity protection through Surfshark Alert, so your digital life stays protected from all angles. And the best part is, one subscription covers all of your devices with no limits, meaning your phone, laptop, tablet, even some smart TVs. They're all protected. And right now, Surfshark is offering 4 extra months completely free when you sign up using my code JimmyDeal at checkout. Just go to surfshark.com/JimmyDeal to claim the offer. And if you're still not sure, you can try it risk-free with their 30-day money-back guarantee. Thanks to Surfshark for keeping the lights on. Now back to the video. So let's talk about how Watcher has spent the past year on YouTube. You see, their announcement was framed as a final farewell to the website, to the point that it was quite literally titled Goodbye YouTube, as they wanted to make it clear that they were done being just YouTubers.
As sad as it is to say goodbye to YouTube, it's the right thing to do.
If this is my last time on YouTube, then baby, what a life I've lived here.
But that wasn't the most damaging part of their announcement. You see, other channels who have made this move will specifically only put new content behind the paywall, meaning that whatever the audience was used to getting for free, they would continue to. So non-paying viewers could expect their experience to be unchanged or maybe even improved. In fact, this is a point they tend to emphasize very heavily.
Now we're not leaving YouTube. You're still gonna get all the free stuff you're used to seeing right here.
Look, I get it. A lot of you aren't gonna want to pay for this, and that's fine. We'll still be releasing all of the free videos we normally do. In fact, we'll be releasing more, many free episodes of our new shows, for instance. So this should be a win-win for everyone.
And as it turns out, that was for a good reason. Because in the case of Watcher, not only would all of their series be moved behind the paywall going forward, their original announcement implied that their entire back catalog would be similarly struck from YouTube.
Yeah, the beta will be a transitional period where you'll still be able to access content on YouTube, but beginning May 31st, you'll need to become a member of our streaming service to access full seasons and new releases.
Now, it's worth noting that Watcher claimed the latter point was never the intention, but either way, I don't think it's hard to see how their language would have given someone that impression. I also don't think it's hard to see why this was such a colossal misstep for Watcher, seeing as how it's the support of the general non-paying audience that let the channel even consider a move like this, right? So in trying to correct this error, Watcher ended up taking a way more extreme pro-viewer approach, basically promising that the streamer would not emphasize exclusive content and instead focus on serving as an early access point.
If you want to watch our shows early and ad-free, you can catch them on the Watcher platform a month earlier. After that, you'll be able to watch our shows on YouTube for free.
Yeah, it's a really restrained approach, even beyond what's widely considered to be a generous arrangement, but the added goodwill was clearly needed. So, okay, in a full 180, Watcher went from trying to leave behind the label of YouTuber to fully embracing it for the foreseeable future. So how has that paid off? well, it's complicated. See, according to Social Blade, the group lost about 90,000 subscribers in the immediate wake of their announcement. What's more, their subscriber count continued to decrease until July, about 3 months later. And between August 2024 and March of 2025, they've averaged just under 14,000 gained subscribers and 6.5 million views per month, which is great until you take a step back, as within the same time frame a year earlier, they were averaging almost double both the subscribers and views, and their upload schedule has been almost identical in that time. Now, it's worth noting that these are public stats, which don't account for things like deleted videos, which subtract from a channel's public view count, but still, it gives us some broad strokes to work with. Because either way, their business on YouTube has been cut dramatically by the controversy. And remember, as time goes on, their back catalog only grows, meaning these numbers should be going up, though it's hard to know what that means for the revenue of the overall business. Because while yes, they do now have the paid streaming service, they also shut down their Patreon, which previously had almost 6,000 paid members. So I would be very curious to hear the numbers that they're working with, because I can't imagine that the streamer has been particularly successful. I mean, yes, there's the whole controversy, but with their new approach, I don't see what would possibly be the point in paying for this. Largely because what little content is exclusive to Watcher TV, honestly, none of it really strikes me as a selling point. Like their sub 10-minute behind the scenes series, Road Files, or Ghost Files Evidence Room, where they talk more in detail about the evidence that they found during their investigations. Like, is there a strong demand for people to pay another subscription just to watch content that supplements their free series? And the benefit of videos releasing early, in my opinion, is not a selling point at all. Because if you just wait, you're still getting content at the same rate if it's always just a month-long delay. Like either way, you can expect X pieces of content per week. And as for going ad-free, if you wanted to pay for that solution, why would you not just pay for YouTube Premium and have that perk apply to all of your favorite YouTube channels? Like the original vision for the streamer was for it to be a standalone product, not just something that appeals to superfans that want to go the extra mile. For that goal, their Patreon was already doing incredibly well. I don't know, I just struggle to see what they could be gaining from this that justifies having to manage yet another platform that ultimately provides the same benefit of one where they were already well established. And even if somehow the new streamer is making up for these problems, their YouTube is ultimately going to have to act as the main promotion of their brand, what grows it, right? Like their free content is going to be what introduces them to new viewers who might later consider supporting them financially. But if their overall exposure is going down, that takes a lot of wind from their sails when talking about longevity. What's more, they launched a new channel where they primarily post the aforementioned successor to Worth It. And while the views per video are great for a new channel, they've only posted 9 of them in the past year. And while yeah, for television that sounds normal, man, that is an underwhelming way to launch a YouTube channel. For context, a content strategy expert like MatPat would generally recommend having close to that many uploads just on day 1.
And so when we launch a channel, we launch it with 5 videos. That is a hard and fast rule for us, so that way people go on a significant watch time journey in that first week period, so that way it tells YouTube, wow, this is a great channel that's gonna get people to watch and they're gonna be really engaged.
Like, I'm sorry, but for a spin-off of a channel with 3 million subscribers, one that is rebooting one of BuzzFeed's biggest series, 300k subscribers after a year is not great in my opinion. Or at least that would be my takeaway if that's exactly how things happened. But it kind of isn't. See, the channel had actually launched in March of 2025, though travel season had premiered in June of 2024, because the first season was actually originally uploaded to the Watcher channel, but somehow the first season of uploads was migrated to this new channel with the original analytics and engagement intact, which I don't know how they did that, but okay then, that means they got 300k in about 3 months, which is a lot better, sure, but that's such a weird way to launch what has the potential to become their new flagship program. And the founders actually talked more recently about the decision-making behind this strange approach.
We are going to be taking all the food stuff and putting it somewhere else. I still love making food content. There still is an audience for it, but one big lesson that we learned is that sometimes those audiences are not the same. We understand that if you came for spooky content and you were served a food video, that could be very confusing.
Now, I'll go into this more later, but I would call this a good example of a pretty glaring misstep in their strategy. One that, in my opinion, was wholly avoidable, but is kind of inevitable, at least from a group that seems more passionate about producing media than YouTube specifically. Like, launching new channels to cover a creator pursuing a distinct niche has long since been the standard practice on YouTube. Like, we're talking for well over a decade at this point. So 300k in 3 months is amazing, but like, that could have been a lot higher had
someone realized that horror adjacent content and food/travel videos have fairly little overlap in viewership. Anyway, I mean, from what I can tell, the only thing that's performing anywhere close to their pre-scandal numbers is their podcast channel, though the rate of new subscribers has been dramatically cut, meaning they probably owe that to returning viewers rather than a growing audience. Like, it's hard to really find anywhere on YouTube that the company is growing, even though they were just a year ago. In fact, more recently, Shane and Ryan have begun to make occasional guest appearances on BuzzFeed Unsolved, the channel they had left behind to start Watcher.
Hello there! You remember us, right? Just popping over here from the Ghost Files bunker at Watcher to talk about the new film, The Ritual.
And considering how much of their language around Watcher focuses on their ambitions of paving their own trail,
we want to make a studio or a platform where we could make unscripted television caliber content on the internet. And to that point, nobody had quite done that. Full-blown developed shows had not been kind of a thing on YouTube to that point.
I don't think the timing of this is a coincidence. I feel like they never intended on coming back to BuzzFeed in any capacity, but there was a need for some combination of increased revenue and exposure. But of course, for a company of this size, YouTube is just a piece of the pie, because behind the scenes, things are actually looking also not that great. See, a huge criticism that Watcher faced when explaining how they were strapped for cash is that their crew seemed really bloated, with over 24 full-time employees on their payroll. Which sure, the extra hands make sense for the on-location documentary shoots, but most of their output was composed of formats that independent creators have always managed to produce alone. And they've made it clear that they didn't want to have to compromise providing the best for their employees.
And we definitely did not want to lay people off that have brought Watcher to life behind the scenes.
But that didn't change the main issue that I think Watcher's approach had. They wanted it all and seemed to have no intention of ever facing reality, but something had to give. They had to find somewhere to compromise in order to survive as a business, especially when their strategy was to specifically produce content that is known to not be viable for the market.
And then it just got kind of twisted into being like, we have to have all our content measure up to this like quality standard that was this arbitrary bar set by things that aren't even in the YouTube ecosphere. So
just to clarify, it got twisted by you.
Yes, we're the twisters.
And it seems like production is where they're finally making these cuts. At first, this took the form of cutting back the scope of some of their shoots. For example, Ghost Files dialed back their production to having somewhat of a vlogging setup at times.
I'm Ryan Bergara, and today I'm going to attempt to push myself to my mental limit to see if I can last 24 straight hours in a haunted house completely alone. No camera crews, no producers, just me, my gear, and whatever resides in that house behind me.
Which I think is a great move. Something that specifically contributed to the backlash was that they kept repeating the idea that their production value was forcing them to be more rigid about earning revenue.
It costs a certain amount to make content in the way that we do it. We try to put things on the screen that we feel adheres to a certain level of quality that you would find on, say, a Netflix or something like that. And, you know, over time, you start to realize like, hey, maybe television shows aren't meant for YouTube. Perhaps we should find a different place that's better suited to the content that we're making and can support the dollar amount that we're putting into each of these episodes.
But much of their viewership was completely indifferent to their production value, to the point that they were straight up quoting Paramore in the comments. But it was made clear that Watcher expanded their staff quickly after their launch. Arguably too quickly.
So growing our staff from 3 to 6 to 10 to 20 to 25.
Yeah, you would expect a company to bring in the revenue to justify hiring someone to a new position rather than hiring a bunch of people and just deciding, we'll figure the rest out later. And they more recently reflected on exactly what caused this misstep, what caused them to feel like everything had to be pushed to such a high level, including simple Let's Plays and commentary videos. And I think that the trap they fell into is actually a pretty understandable one.
When people aren't mad at us for justifiable reasons, you go back and look at the comments, almost every video we ever posted, people in the comments were like, I love the production value of this. No other YouTube channel is doing it like this. And we were like, they really like that's important to them. And then we found out most people didn't not have that opinion and just maybe weren't, you know, vocalizing. Because why would they need to vocalize like, hey, they don't need to do all this, you know, when we're doing all that and just putting it out regularly.
Which could speak to a greater issue of just like what it could be like being a creator, looking at feedback and taking the complete wrong, take away from things.
And considering they went from the most aggressive YouTuber streaming service to the most pointless, that misstep was going to come at a cost. So in March of 2025, it came out that the company was facing massive layoffs. In fact, their former chief creative officer has said that the entire creative and production teams were out of a job, with Shane later clarifying that many of these employees would be shifting to freelance work, which, if you don't know, is much cheaper for employers, since payment is directly exchanged for labor, while for employees hired on a full-time basis, they get paid the same amount during slower periods of work. Plus, the company no longer has to pay for benefits. Simply put, a freelance arrangement is generally more directly beneficial to an employer, while a full-time arrangement is more directly beneficial to the employee. And what makes this mistake even more glaring to me is the fact that Watcher isn't exactly the first YouTube channel to make this exact mistake and respond with an overcorrection that causes backlash.
I feel like there was a little bit of tension with the way that Defy wanted this cast to be incorporated versus the way that Ian and I felt like you should be incorporated to get the audience on board. And I think it was because the way that Defy hired you all on was 4-year contract, full time.
Yeah.
So it was like, make them work, get them in everything.
Now, Watcher striving for a full-time staff is a noble pursuit. I don't want to undermine that. But it is worth noting that both Smosh and Dropout, which are companies with much longer histories but similar production setups, both rely on a hybrid approach to their employees, hiring both freelance and full-time workers. And there are creative ways to make that as ethical as possible.
Do you still pay for auditions, by the way?
Yeah.
So, okay, there's revenue sharing for people who perform on the app. They pay for auditions. We have this huge debate.
Yeah.
And I've always been an advocate of paying for auditions.
Also, their expansion seemed controlled, patient, and measured. Like at the start of 2024, Dropout had only 20 proper employees, which was already fewer than Watcher had at that time.
When we started, we didn't, have the resources to hire a lot of people. Now we're deliberately keeping it small because we want to spend as much time as we can creating content, putting as much money as possible on screen. We're 20 people now. We were only 15 last year. We'll probably be 25 by the end of this year. Our development process is super non-traditional. Almost all of our shows to date have been conceived of by a very, very small group of in-house people.
Yet Dropout was more of an established company with presumably much higher production costs, since they don't have the more low-key series that Watcher often leans on. Also, Dropout was already an established streaming platform at this point, even if their success exploded more recently. Again, Watcher's mentality on staff was an incredibly noble one, but I think a recurring issue here is them wanting to sprint to the finish line so badly that they neglected their start, which led to them having an incredibly delicate foundation where one shakeup would lead to everything crumbling down. And to me, it feels like their impatience all revolves around how they view the years they had spent at BuzzFeed, where they count those years as being part of their current business's lifespan, so they expect themselves to be years ahead of what's realistic, when in reality, they're incredibly successful for a YouTube company that was started in late 2019. They just needed to be more intentional and cautious about their expansion. In a weird way, it reminds me a lot of what I've previously said about Shane Dawson. We're going into the production of his movie, he seemed to have this chip on his shoulder that the 5 years he spent on YouTube meant he already paid his dues to the industry. In other words, he should be taken far more seriously than a first-time indie director. When in reality, while one part of this journey led to the second, they still needed to be viewed as completely separate ventures. If you ask me, Watcher should have been treated as a fresh start from BuzzFeed Unsolved rather than some kind of shortcut or continuation, at least from a business perspective. And I alluded to this before, but I think there's also a serious drawback to the isolated approach that Watcher has taken to their strategy, because I truly do believe that some of their mistakes should have been spotted from a mile away. But how could they be obvious to me, yet not them, when they're more experienced and successful? Honestly, I think it's because out of the 3 founders, none of them strike me as huge nerds about YouTube. Production, sure, they're all clearly passionate, but I'm talking about a MatPat, or Hank Green, or even Mr. Beast, someone who is a huge nerd about the entity that is YouTube, especially under the hood. Like, they openly talk about how they aren't particularly drawn to a lot of the day-to-day of what's going on online.
We were very rattled. We're not people who are very online. We're becoming elderly. Making stuff that goes up essentially for free is not a good business model. And other companies have found ways to be better at it. We're not geniuses, as many people have pointed out.
And they've alluded more than once to a lack of interest in playing the game when it comes to YouTube.
Which is why I think our content doesn't necessarily always trend. We've trended quite a few times, okay? But that's never, that's never our goal. And I think by that token, YouTube has never been like the perfect fit for us.
We didn't want to compromise our content to ensure they met advertising requirements.
Which, yeah, integrity matters. We don't need yet another channel that is solely beholden to the whims of the algorithm. But in my opinion, it's naive to think that you can avoid playing the game forever when you start pursuing YouTube as the foundation of a business. You kind of owe it to the people relying on you to do everything ethically possible to make what you're doing sustainable. I mean, I've talked about MatPat a lot because he and his wife Stephanie are two of the forefront experts on content strategy and new media, period. They also happen to both be digital media consultants. Did Watcher ever reach out to them or someone like them about the considerations in this space that they might not think of? I mean, hell, the Try Guys weren't shy about extending olive branches when they wanted to start a streaming service.
I want to give credit in every interview at least once to Dropout because I think they paved the way for this model. Sam Reich was extremely gracious in giving us his learnings and say, hey, here's what we got right, here's what we messed up. I think that there are a lot of people doing interesting work in this space who have figured out how to kind of break free from the shackles of YouTube.
Yet I can't really find anything to suggest that Watcher has done much outreach when making such major decisions. And while wanting to operate as an island is very appealing, I don't think that that's the right move when you're occupying a space that ultimately you don't control. And while they're clearly aware of the negatives that come with an advertiser-driven platform, I don't see why for their type of content it wouldn't be fairly simple to find compromises that don't derail their creative goals. Though more recently, Watcher had actually released a full podcast episode talking about their takeaways from the scandal a year later. And honestly, the way that they talk about this does make me hopeful for where their heads are at going forward.
But very important to start this discussion with the acknowledgement of that was a massive mistake.
You don't have to have the perfect operations or the perfect PR and marketing, but you do have to really put the viewers at the center. And you can never, ever forget that.
This whole discussion is not a woe is us. We're the victims here. The conversation largely was to frame our thinking throughout this year and what we've gleaned from this.
This imaginary bar of TV caliber content to just help people understand that we're trying to do things the right way around here. And I will say that has been erased from all the books here at Watcher. We're not saying that anymore. And it did make us lose sight of what we were trying to do.
So in another world, one where Watcher mirrors the approach their competitors took to a streaming service and slowly made the transition from a freelance to full-time staff, there's a real chance they would still be growing rather than having to scale back their operation. But that's not the world we live in. In a lot of ways, I think that Watcher can be seen as a classic Icarus tale, where this charming trio left behind the shackles of a corporation, but too quickly wanted to restore all of the benefits they chose to leave behind. And while things don't look great for them now, it would be fascinating to see what a possible Watcher comeback could look like. In fact, I'd really like to see it. And if fear of bankruptcy isn't enough of a motivator, then maybe they should just focus on not becoming a Sunny V2 video. Because for a YouTuber, yeah, that's a fate worse than death.